There was a time in America when the future felt limitless. Money moved faster than rules. Success arrived before society had time to ask questions. At the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th, a new class of wealth began to rise. They were not only building businesses, they were building identities. And they built enormous mansions not to live in, but to be seen, to be acknowledged, to prove they deserved to stand beside names that had ruled society for generations. Within this quiet confrontation between new money and old money, one palace once stood high on a hill on Long Island, overlooking the ocean and a distant New York City more than 30 miles away, a place that glowed through the night, that welcomed the most powerful people in America, and then vanished, leaving not a single stone behind. Harbor Hill did not fall because of poverty. It fell after it had everything. What could cause one of the greatest symbols of American wealth to disappear completely? Who was the man who began this dream? And how did a fortune once counted among the largest in the nation unravel within a single generation? This story does not begin with a building. It begins decades earlier, with a man, with a decision, and with a belief that seemed impossible to fail. If you want to understand why America's most powerful dreams often carried the seeds of their own collapse, stay with us until the end. And if you love history told from behind the doors of power, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let us return to the moment when everything began. A dream born from poverty. In the middle of the 19th century in Ireland, John William Mackay was born into poverty, at a time when the country was gripped by hardship and famine. Opportunity was almost non-existent. For many of his generation, survival meant leaving home behind. Still young, Mackay crossed the Atlantic to America with nothing, no capital, no formal education, no connections. His early years in the United States were not a story of ambition or success, but of labor. He took the hardest jobs society would offer an impoverished immigrant, selling newspapers on street corners, working in shipyards, accepting any work that could be exchanged for cash to stay alive. But America was expanding westward, and with that expansion came mining towns rising out of deserts and mountains, dangerous places, brutal places, but places where men without privilege still had a chance. Mackay moved west, not chasing wealth, but because it was the last place where someone like him could change his fate. In 1873, in Virginia City, Nevada, Mackay and his partners struck the Big Bonanza, a massive ore body within the Comstock Lode. This was no ordinary discovery. In American history, very few mineral finds rivaled its scale. The silver and gold extracted generated hundreds of millions of dollars at the time, the equivalent of tens of billions today. Within just a few years, John William Mackay rose from immigrant laborer to one of the wealthiest men in the United States. Newspapers called him the Silver King, but what mattered more was what he did next. Mackay did not keep his wealth buried in metal. He pushed it into the heart of the nation's financial system. He invested heavily in Western Union, the most powerful communications company in America at the time. Control over information networks turned Mackay into more than a rich man. It made him a national financial force. From silver mines in the West, he stepped directly into the center of American economic power. And that was where the first real conflict emerged. Despite his fortune and influence, Mackay was never fully accepted by the old money families of the Northeast. To them, mining wealth was still viewed as money born of chance, not lineage. Mackay could buy controlling stakes in major corporations, but he could not buy entry into the most exclusive social salons. He possessed economic power, but lacked symbolic power. He had wealth, but not the respect he sought. And it was this absence that shaped the next crucial decision of the Mackay family. Because if John William Mackay could not purchase acceptance himself, the remaining question was this: Who would inherit his fortune, and for what purpose? Clarence H. Mackay. When John William Mackay rose into the ranks of America's wealthiest men, his family was no longer an impoverished immigrant household. But they were not yet a fully accepted dynasty either, and that gap placed an invisible burden on the next generation. John William Mackay had 3 children. Among them, Clarence Hungerford Mackay was the eldest son. From an early age, Clarence was not raised simply to inherit wealth. He grew up inside a clear contradiction. On one side stood the immense fortune his father had built from silver mines and financial investments. On the other stood the cautious, often dismissive gaze of the Northeast's old money families, who still viewed the Mackays as newcomers. In the final years of the 19th century, as John Mackay became a national financial force through strategic investments, particularly in telecommunications, Clarence was being prepared for a different role. Not as a miner, not as a speculator, but as a representative. A representative of the Mackay name in a world where money alone was not enough. In 1902, John William Mackay died. His vast fortune was divided among his children. But this inheritance did not take the form of a simple division of cash. As the eldest son, Clarence assumed control over the most symbolically powerful assets, along with the responsibility of safeguarding the family's public standing, a form of wealth that could not be measured in dollars. At that moment, the Mackay family fortune, adjusted to modern value, amounted to several $billion. Yet Clarence understood one essential truth. Wealth born from mining and industrial investment could generate economic power, but it did not automatically open the doors to high society, the long-established elite of America. In that world, the question was never how much money you had. It was who you were, where your family came from, whom you married, and the spaces you inhabited. Clarence understood that if the Mackay name was to be legitimized, he would have to play by rules that had been written long before his family arrived. It was at this point that a critical shift occurred. Clarence did not focus on doubling the fortune his father had created. Instead, he sought to convert wealth into social authority, culture, marriage, architecture. These were the tools he believed could accomplish what silver and stocks could not. But this was only the foundation. The real question now was which tool Clarence would choose first to rewrite the Mackay family's place in American society. And what would that first choice be? A social alliance. By the end of the 19th century, Clarence H. Mackay understood one essential truth. Money could buy shares, land, and corporations, but it could not instantly purchase acceptance from an old and guarded elite. In that world, marriage was often the shortest path through doors that wealth alone could not open. In 1897, Clarence married Catherine Alexander Dwyer, known in society as Kitty. Unlike Clarence, Kitty was born into a family with a long-established social history. Her lineage carried connections to English nobility, a detail of great significance in American high society at the time, where ancestry still functioned as a measure of legitimacy. This marriage immediately altered Clarence's position. Doors that had once opened only slightly now opened wider. He was welcomed into elite salons and social circles where money alone had never granted him access. Without public display or explanation, Kitty's presence beside him gave the Mackay name a level of social legitimacy it had previously lacked. The true turning point came 1 year later. In 1898, John William Mackay presented the newlyweds with a wedding gift that captured the attention of New York society. 648 acres of land in Roslyn, Long Island, set high above Hempstead Harbor. Even by the standards of the era, this was an extraordinary property, not only for its size, but for its elevation and commanding views. On clear days, the land offered a view stretching more than 30 miles to New York City. What made this gift exceptional was not its scale, but its ownership. The entire property was placed solely in Kitty's name. At the end of the 19th century, it was rare for a woman to hold legal title to land of this magnitude. The decision signaled the absolute financial power of the Mackay family, while simultaneously securing Kitty's social position within a world where authority was still overwhelmingly male. From that moment on, the land ceased to be an ordinary estate. It became the foundation for something far larger, a site elevated enough, expansive enough, and separate enough to support a statement, not just for Clarence, but for the Mackay name itself. But this was only the beginning. The question was no longer whether Clarence had entered high society. The question now was what he would build on this land to permanently define his family's place within it, and how exactly would that symbol be created. Architecture as power once Clarence H. Mackay had secured what his family had lacked for decades, social legitimacy through marriage. He faced a far greater question. How could that fragile acceptance be transformed into something permanent? And his answer was not found in words, but in space. In the late 1890s, Clarence hired Stanford White, one of the most influential and sought-after architects in America at the time. White did not simply design houses. He designed status. His buildings were created for those who wished to be seen, remembered, and placed alongside the established elite. Clarence did not ask for a comfortable residence. He demanded a structure that spoke the language of classical Europe, deliberately shaped like a palace. Harbor Hill was conceived not as a family home, but as a castle placed atop a hill, elevated, isolated, and looking down upon the world around it. The approach was intentionally slow. A long, gently winding drive lined with tall maple trees forced every visitor into a ritual of arrival. No one entered Harbor Hill casually. From the first moment, power announced itself. The mansion was built of limestone and stretched across roughly 80,000 square feet, containing 52 rooms. At the time of its completion, it ranked among the largest private residences in the United States. To sustain its daily operation, more than 100 servants were employed, including butlers, cooks, housemaids, gardeners, and stable hands. Harbor Hill did not function like a home. It functioned like a court. Inside, every space was designed to impress. A grand oak-paneled hall opened beneath soaring ceilings filled with natural light. A monumental staircase drew the eye upward, compelling guests to look up from their very first steps. Reception rooms followed the ornate style of Louis XV, filled with intricate detailing. There were vast libraries, an armory, and a European art collection assembled from works centuries old. Each room told the same story, that the owner of this place was not merely wealthy, but fully aware of his position within the social order. Once completed, Harbor Hill quickly became the social center of Long Island's Gold Coast. Situ. Receptions, formal dinners, and gatherings unfolded within spaces designed to make power visible. From its hilltop, the glow of Harbor Hill's lights could be seen from afar, a signal that this was no longer just property, but a symbol. But this is where the story begins to turn, because a structure built to command recognition from the outside inevitably raises a different question, one that cannot be ignored. Can power, constructed from stone, light, and ceremony, preserve happiness within the walls it creates? And the fracture of a marriage. As Harbor Hill was completed and its lights began to glow night after night, Kitty Mackay quickly became one of the most talked about women on Long Island. With her social background, striking presence, and instinctive command of elite gatherings, she stepped naturally into her role as mistress of one of the largest private estates in America. In the public eye, Kitty was no longer simply Clarence Mackay's wife. She became a symbol of style, social influence, and the emerging aristocracy of the Gold Coast. In the early years of the 20th century, Harbor Hill gained a reputation for hosting entertainments that went far beyond ordinary receptions. Guests arrived from the worlds of finance, politics, diplomacy, and the arts. The lights burned late into the night. Orchestras played for hours. More than 100 servants operated the estate like a stage where nothing was permitted to fail. Everything moved with precision, ritual, and the appearance of perfection. Clarence maintained that image without compromise. To him, Harbor Hill was not simply a home. It was proof that the Mackay family's social strategy had succeeded. Yet as the public image grew more flawless, fractures inside the marriage became impossible to ignore. Kitty increasingly felt confined by the role of the exemplary society wife. The repetition of formal dinners, rigid expectations, and constant performance turned the vast spaces of Harbor Hill into something suffocating. While Clarence bound himself ever more tightly to order, reputation, and control, Kitty began to seek freedom within the very social world she dominated. That distance soon became the subject of quiet conversation. It began as whispers among the servants, then glances exchanged at formal gatherings. Eventually, rumors circulated openly within New York's upper circles. Kitty was believed to be involved in relationships that crossed the boundaries of marriage. While specific details were rarely recorded in public, the persistence of these rumors alone was enough to ignite a social scandal. For Clarence, this was a direct blow to honor. Yet in the social climate of the time, divorce was not a simple option, particularly for a family still consolidating its place among the elite. Clarence chose silence. The parties continued. The lights remained on. Harbor Hill carried on as a carefully staged performance, where no one was allowed to see what was breaking behind the scenes. But this is where the story begins to turn. Because when a marriage exists only to sustain an image, the question is no longer whether it can be repaired. The question becomes what Clarence would discover beyond the walls of Harbor Hill, and what would he find outside this marriage? The contrast. In the early years of the 20th century, while Harbor Hill remained illuminated and its rituals of entertainment continued uninterrupted, Clarence Mackay began appearing in spaces far removed from ballrooms and grand halls. He was seen not at society dinners, but in New York's theaters and concert halls. It was in this world that Clarence met Anna Case. Anna Case did not come from privilege. She was born into poverty and entered the world of music by the most demanding path possible. She had no powerful relatives, no social backing, only her voice. By the early 20th century, Anna Case had emerged as one of America's most notable opera singers, appearing on major stages and earning recognition for both technical precision and emotional depth. The contrast between Anna and the world of Harbor Hill could not have been sharper. Anna did not operate within social rituals. She did not require salons, guest lists, or lavish gatherings to be seen. Her value existed on stage, where attention was earned through talent rather than lineage. For Clarence, this difference was profound. While his marriage functioned as a social structure maintained for image and position, his relationship with Anna developed slowly and quietly. There were no announcements, no displays, no search for approval. That restraint was precisely what set it apart. Contemporary social records suggest that Clarence and Anna did not appear publicly as a couple in the early stages of their relationship. This discretion reflected not only the moral standards of the era, but also the significant social risk Clarence faced if he crossed those boundaries too soon. Even so, Anna's presence marked a decisive shift. For the first time, Clarence was not building a relationship to reinforce status. He was choosing a person. But this is where the story enters more dangerous territory, because as Clarence discovered sincerity beyond the walls of Harbor Hill, the world beyond those walls was beginning to change in ways no one could control. So what exactly was shifting beyond their private lives, and how would it reshape the fate of Clarence and Anna? Loss, disintegration. By the late 1920s, the world Harbor Hill had been built to serve was beginning to change in ways no member of the upper class could control. In 1929, the American stock market collapsed. The financial crisis spread rapidly from Wall Street through the national economy, dragging down asset values, credit systems, and public confidence. At that moment, Clarence Mackay's wealth was not held in cash. The majority of his fortune existed in corporate shares, large-scale real estate, and art collections. These assets carried immense value during economic expansion, but became dangerously illiquid once the crisis began. As stock prices plunged and transactions froze, the paper value of the Mackay fortune evaporated faster than liquid capital could be generated to sustain daily life. At the same time, Harbor Hill continued to consume enormous resources, more than 100 servants, the maintenance of limestone architecture, gardens, stables, heating systems, lighting, and the rituals of elite social life, all designed for an era of unlimited money. As income streams weakened, the mansion that once symbolized power became an unavoidable financial burden. It was under this pressure that long-standing personal tensions reached their conclusion. In 1931, Clarence and Kitty formally divorced. The marriage, once regarded as a flawless social alliance, ended quietly. Kitty left the United States and settled in Paris, separating herself from the society that had once celebrated her as a social queen. That same year, Kitty died in Paris. Contemporary records suggest her death occurred far from public attention, bringing a private end to a life once lived at the center of social visibility. Following the divorce, Clarence married Anna Case. But this marriage unfolded under entirely different circumstances. There were no grand entertainments, no elaborate rituals. Harbor Hill was no longer the center of daily life. Clarence and Anna left the estate and moved to a small farmhouse, choosing a quieter existence shaped by financial reality and personal preference. In 1938, Clarence Mackay died. He did not leave behind a stable empire for the next generation, but a complex financial legacy. Outstanding debts, tax obligations, assets of significant value that were difficult to sell during prolonged economic depression. The financial structure that had sustained the Mackay family during its golden years no longer functioned as it once had. Anna Case, though a celebrated artist, lacked the consistent income required to maintain elite real estate holdings. The Manhattan residence purchased during years of high valuation came with property taxes, maintenance costs, and a mortgage that demanded regular payment. When cash flow failed to meet those obligations, the property was foreclosed. The loss did not occur as a sudden shock, but as the inevitable result of years of declining assets and unsustainable expenses. The Mackay fortune did not vanish in a single moment. It disintegrated over time, gradually eroded by a financial structure built for an era of permanent growth. When that era ended, what remained was not a dramatic collapse, but a slow contraction, until a name once synonymous with wealth and power survived only in historical records and collective memory. The echo of an era. After Clarence Mackay's death, Harbor Hill was no longer a home. It became a space too large for a world that had already moved on. During the years of the Second World War, the United States Army repurposed the vast estate for military use. Lawns that once hosted glittering receptions became grounds for training and preparation. The lights of high society no longer burned through the night. The great halls fell silent. When the war ended, Harbor Hill did not return to its former role. There was no longer enough money, enough purpose, or enough belief to revive a mansion created for an era that had already closed. In 1947, the structure once regarded as a symbol of power was completely demolished. Limestone walls, sweeping staircases, oak-paneled halls vanished in a matter of days, far more quickly than the years it had taken to build them. By 1955, the land was sold to real estate developers. Across the 648 acres where Harbor Hill once stood, a modern residential neighborhood emerged. Paved streets replaced the long, tree-lined approach. Identical houses rose where a palace had once overlooked the water. No physical trace of Harbor Hill remained, only black and white photographs and the stories that survived them. Yet Harbor Hill never truly disappeared. It endured in the American imagination, in literature, in collective memory, and most notably in the spirit of the Great Gatsby, the glittering parties, the glowing lights of ambition, and the quiet emptiness that follows when a dream is achieved, only to reveal it was never enough. Harbor Hill stands as a symbol of the American dream at its most extreme. A moment when people believed money could purchase position, recognition, even happiness itself. But the story also reveals something else. Structures built to serve a specific era rarely survive beyond the era that created them. Perhaps what makes Harbor Hill worth remembering is not how large it once was, but the question it leaves behind. When power is constructed from wealth, ritual, and image, what remains when the world changes? And are the greatest dreams measured by what we accumulate, or by what endures after everything else has fallen away? If you would like to continue exploring the estates, families, and power-driven dreams that once shaped America, the videos on screen will take you deeper into stories with many layers still waiting to be uncovered. Thank you for watching. If this story gave you something to reflect on, please leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe to continue exploring history, power, and the traces left behind by time. Goodbye, and we will see you in the next video.